Erev Tov Lekulam. Thank you for joining. The sermon today is in honor of the yahrzeit of our dear friend Udi's father. His neshama should have an aliyah, and of course, in honor of the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, whose yahrzeit is tonight and tomorrow, the 24th of Teves. There once was a Jew who went to heaven. He was a good. He didn't die. He visited. During his lifetime, he was given the choice. Yeah, where do you want to go? So they took him for a visit to Gan Eden, to the good place. And he saw it's nice and warm, balmy weather, everything is great. Okay. Then they took him to the other place. And as he's walking around the other place, it's hot, it's terrible, it stinks. But he sees, as he's going around and around, he sees, and in one corner, there's a plaque, a big sign that says, here, there's going to be brand new preschool opening in this corner. And on the other side, it says, there's a new hospital opening up over here. And on the other side, it says, home for the elderly, public library. He says, wow, by the time I get here, it'll be pretty good. So he chose the other place, not the good place, because with great expectations that by the time he arrived, it'd be great, it'd be perfect. Well, 5 years down the line, his time comes. And as you would guess, he arrives and it's just all the bad stuff and none of the good stuff. So he complains. He says to the guard at the gate, he says, excuse me, where's the new preschool and the new library and the new home for the elderly? And the angel could not, what are you saying? When I was here 5 years ago, there was a plaque on the wall that says, here, there's going to be a new library. Here, there's going to be a home for the elderly. Come on, what happened to all that stuff? Oh, that was an election year. Well, here we are again. We thought the election mess was done when it was done. Turns out we're in it up to our necks a second time. The good news is that in the Torah this week, we don't have to fight about who is a good leader, who is the best leaders, or at least who is going to do the least harm. We don't have that question in the Chumash and the Torah. In this week's Torah portion, we see it's already been decided, it's chosen. God found his man. That's none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. But exactly what is it about Moshe Rabbeinu? What did God see in him that predicted a bright future in leadership? The Medrash gives us the answer. And the answer, of course, is he was a very faithful shepherd. He tended his flock very, very carefully. What exactly is the story? So the Medrash points to one event. And it's actually pointed out in the Chumash. Moshe is tending his flock. And while he's tending his flock, one of his lambs goes on the lamb. Runs off into the wilderness. So Moshe, being a good shepherd, doesn't want to lose even one of his congregants. So he runs after him. And he's chasing him, and he's running, and he's chasing, and he's running. And that's how he finds the burning bush. Yes? But what happened just before he found the burning bush? He catches the lamb. He scoops him up in his hands. He says, what's going on? He sees the lamb is running to find water to drink. And Moshe Rabbeinu, the Medrash says, whispers into the lamb's ear, oy, 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 I didn't realize you were thirsty. You're thirsty, come, let's get you a drink. You're tired, come, I'll carry you home. And when Hashem saw this, Hashem says, you can have such mercy on a little animal like this. I'm certainly, and this animal is the flock of a human being. I'm hiring you to be the shepherd for my own flock, the Jewish people. Beautiful story, lovely story, right? Question is, like they say in New York, so what's the big deal? So what's the big deal? If Moshe Rabbeinu notices that the sheep is thirsty, so he lets him drink. So what's the big deal? So Moshe Rabbeinu notices that the sheep is tired, so he carries him home. So what's the big deal? So Moshe Rabbeinu notices that one of the sheep is running away, so he runs after him. So what's the big deal? If he doesn't run after him, he's going to have to pay out of his salary. It's going to come out of his monthly paycheck. So what's the big deal, Moshe Rabbeinu? The question is amplified by the fact that the Medrash really starts with the story of David HaMelech. King David was also chosen as the shepherd of the Jewish people because of his treatment of his flocks. But his treatment was creative, artistic, right? He would bring them out to the pasture. He would let the really young ones go first, the young ones who had a hard time nibbling on the crunchy grass. So he would let them go out first and eat the really, really soft grass. And then he would let the elderly sheep go out because they had, weak teeth. They had a hard time eating the really hard stuff. They ate the medium grass. And then he let the vigorous young sheep go out, the strong ones, and they would go and eat whatever was left. That's creative leadership. What did Moshe Rabbeinu do? What did he do? What was so special? In the book called Mayone HaChasidus, that was gathered together by my uncle, my great uncle, not because he's a generation away from me, but because he's a great man. And so we call him the great uncle. His name is Rabbi Alter Eliyahu Friedman in Israel. He put together a book, a sefer called Mayone HaChasidus, from the wellsprings of Chasidus, explanations on the Parsha. So he brings an idea from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that's absolutely amazing. Moshe was not chosen because of what he did. Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen, really, the star of the show is because of the sheep, because of the little lamb. Lahavdil. Mary had a little lamb. Lahavdil alf avdolas, alfi alaf avdolas. The reason Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen is because of the little lamb. What did the little lamb teach Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu, to his surprise, discovered that a little sheep doesn't run away out of spite. A little lamb runs away because he's looking for something. A little lamb runs away, but even when he runs away, he still wants to be connected to the shepherd. As he's running away, he's looking over his shoulder. Is somebody following me? Is somebody following me? Do they care that I'm missing? A person that is rebelling against you, if you're in a position of leadership especially, a person is rebelling against you, fighting against you, it doesn't mean that they have something against you. They need something. They are in search of something. And Moshe Rabbeinu was taught this lesson by this little lamb who ran away because he needed a drink of water. Every human being is thirsty for something, and if they're involved in an act of rebellion, it's because they're trying to quench their thirst for whatever it is that they're looking for. And that's really the punchline of the Medrash. Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen because he couldn't hold himself in. He couldn't contain himself. And he says to the little sheep, he whispers in his ear, I'm so sorry that I was angry at you. I'm so sorry that I misjudged you. I thought you were rebelling against me. It turns out you just needed something. You needed a drink of water. You need to be carried home. Fine, no problem. I'm here for you. Human beings are the moral of the story. We are complex creatures. Sometimes we're so complex, we can't even tell you, we don't even know ourselves what it is that we need. Let's say in a classroom, a student in the classroom, it's hot in the classroom, right? Or a student starts fidgeting. So the teacher could say, this is a rebellion. Out of the classroom. Or the teacher can stop and think for a minute. What is the child in search of? Is he in search of a cooler climate? He just needs to air out his schwitzy bones? Is he simply in search of some attention from the teacher? Hello, notice me. Acknowledge that I exist. The moral of the story, that the lesson, the most important lesson that Moshe Rabbeinu learned here on that evening, that day that he chased after the little lamb and the lamb led him to a meeting with God, is never doubt, never write off your people. Trust in your people. Believe in your people. One who is rebelling, it's not against you. Don't take it personal. A leader has to believe with complete faith in their message, in what they stand for. And you have to believe that every Jewish heart wants the thing that you're selling, if what you're selling is in line with Torah. And never give up hope on any little lamb in your flock. And this is something that the Rebbes of other Hasidic groups have explained. Not from the Chabad persuasion, but from the other groups. There is a Mishnah that says, Hevedan es kol ha'adam lekaf zechus. Judge every person to the side of merit. Generally, in English, it's known as judge your neighbor favorably or judge the other one favorably. But if you read it precisely, these Rebbes of Hasidus, of Hasidic thought, they point out, if you read and translate that Mishnah precisely, it means judge the entire person and you'll find a reason you'll find a favorable impression. Don't just assess their misbehavior and try to explain away their misbehavior by some concoction, some excuse, some make-believe fairy tale you tell yourself so you don't have to be angry at them. No. Take in the entire person. What's their history? What's their background? Where are they coming from? What are their talents? What are their challenges? What are they facing in this moment? When you appreciate the whole person, you can really appreciate the person. There is an Israeli news writer for the newspaper called Haaretz, but he was the New York correspondent. And he had an opportunity to meet with the Rebbe one time. And he writes later, he says, I dreamt of that meeting for years. I was looking forward to that meeting so much. Meet with one of the giants of the Jewish leadership of that generation. And when I came to the Rebbe's door, he writes, the Rebbe rose from his seat, shook my hand, invited me to sit down. Bright blue eyes, like everybody loves to point out about the Rebbe, and a smile that could melt all the mountains of snow in New York City. But then the conversation that Rebbe had with me was about the faith that the Jewish people have, emunah, the Jewish people have. Not faith that the Jewish people should have, not faith the Jewish people could have if only we would work harder. The Rebbe talked about a faith that every single Jew has implanted in their hearts, even when they don't know it. And the Rebbe said, especially the Jews who live in Israel. Israel is jam-packed to overflowing with faith in God. And the proof is, people live there. Why would you live? How could you survive? How could you maintain your sanity living in a country which is surrounded by enemies that morning and night are talking about your destruction? They're out and they have expressed their interest in harming you and your children, and you live there. And you fight in the army to defend that country. Why would you do that? If not, because you know that God is watching you and you have tremendous faith in God. That's a leader. That's a leader. The leader has tremendous faith in his people. There's a story that I spoke about in a live sermon in Shul 2 Shabbases ago, but it matches this theme very well, so we'll repeat it here. There was a shliach called Reb Shlomo Kovesh, and he's a shliach to Budapest. and he receives a telephone call. Somebody asks him, Rabbi, do you want a synagogue? Want to buy a synagogue? He says, well, what's the price? What's the story? Very briefly, the story is that in the war, that synagogue was confiscated. In Budapest, there were many synagogues. It was a huge Jewish community. During the war, it was confiscated and turned into a television station. The television station bought itself a new property, and now the shul is available to be refurbished and returned. Obviously, we're going to sell it for development, but if the Jewish community wanted it, that would be very fine, very nice. The rabbi comes to visit. It looks nothing like a shul. It looks like a television station. So very, very quickly, the shliach decides he's going to rent the space, and he wants to open it right away. Doesn't want to wait a long time. He wants to open it right away and make a big to-do about it. It's a tremendous excitement. A shul is returned to the Jewish community is no small matter. They decided they're opening services in that shul on Rosh Hashanah. They had an opening ceremony and they had services there Rosh Hashanah. 2 weeks after the opening ceremony, the shliach gets a phone call from Manhattan. He says, this is great. Maybe one of my rich uncles in New York that I have been calling and trying to raise money from, they should help me buy the shul. Maybe he's calling to tell me that he's going to give me the big donation. Fantastic, beautiful. Answers the phone, hello. And the person on the other end of the call says, Rabbi, before I even start, I just want you to know I'm a bad Jew. And the shliach says, there's no such thing as a bad Jew. Says, no, Rabbi. I am a bad Jew. I haven't been in a synagogue in 60 years. The rabbi tries explaining, there's no such thing as a bad Jew. It's just about choices. No. The man insists. Okay, what else is on your mind? He says, I received a notice from the Holocaust Museum in Washington that you opened a synagogue in Budapest. And I want you to know that that is the synagogue where my parents prayed. And that's the synagogue where I had my bar mitzvah. And I would like to put a plaque in my parents' memory in that synagogue. Okay, sounding a little hopeful. What do you do for a living? He says, I'm an electrician. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. Of course, the shliach didn't say that. He said, So the man says, yeah, a while back I was trying to invest in real estate. I wanted to buy a hotel in Budapest. And the shliach is thinking, what kind of an electrician can afford to invest in European real estate? So he did a little more digging. He did a little more research. Turns out that this is no ordinary electrician. This is a guy who owns a company with 300 employees. And they were, not long before, they had been given the contract to do all the electricity in the new Kennedy Airport. It's a big company. This is the answer to the shliach's prayers. The man says, I want to visit. They made a welcome ceremony. They visited. And he says, you remember, I told you I'm a bad Jew. He sat in the shul. He was looking around the shul. He was stunned. He didn't say a word the whole ceremony. At the end, he says, you remember I told you I'm a bad Jew? Let me tell you why. My parents passed away. I was in the supermarket, and the rabbi of the synagogue met me there. He was surprised to see me. He says, aren't you so-and-so's child? Yeah. He says, I don't see you in the synagogue. He says, nobody invites me. The rabbi says, I'm inviting you right now. Come, Rosh Hashanah's around the corner. Come. So I worked up the courage. On Rosh Hashanah, I knocked on the doors of the synagogue. The shamish of the shul, the guard at the gate, he says, where's your ticket? I said, I'm a 12-year-old boy. I don't have a ticket. Maybe I was 14 at the time. I'm a teenager. I don't have a ticket for a synagogue. He says, well, no ticket, can't come in. But the rabbi invited me. You don't have a ticket, you can't come in. He says, I decided then and there that if they're not going to accept me without a ticket, they will never see me with a ticket. And that was it. I never went to another synagogue. I don't even eat in kosher restaurants, he says. On principle. But how grateful am I now that you gave me an opportunity to reconnect with the synagogue of my parents. In the end, the government in Budapest gave the synagogue to the community. They returned stolen properties, right, after the war. So this was one of the properties that was returned free of charge to the Jewish community. And our friend, the electrician, sponsored the majority, the bulk of the renovations. So it ended up being a very, very beautiful relationship between this man, called himself a bad Jew, and the synagogue of his youth. That's the end of the story. And perhaps this is the message that Moshe Rabbeinu learned from his lamb on the lamb. A Jew doesn't need a ticket to get into the synagogue. Even a Jew who has run away and is lost, and maybe even rebellious, and maybe even doesn't want to have, maybe he tore up his ticket and he threw it into the Atlantic Ocean like so many of our ancestors did when they were crossing over into the New World. Maybe they did it on purpose to cut themselves off of the Jewish community. A synagogue is home to each and every Jew. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu express the fact that he had learned this message and received it and really internalized it? We see this after the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf. When the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf, God was furious with them. And he starts describing to Moshe what a big gargantuan mistake it had been to take this people as his people. What a stubborn people. They mess up, I punish them, and they go right back to it. How do you deal with these people? 3 different times Hashem says, this nation is a stiff-necked nation. I can't stand them. Maybe I'll just destroy them and start over. Moshe Rabbeinu turns around to God and says, Hashem, you have to forgive them. You know why? Because they're such a stubborn nation. Those are Moshe Rabbeinu's words. And Hashem says, you know what? You're right. How did that happen? The words of the prosecution become the winning argument of the defense. What did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Moshe Rabbeinu says, remember the lesson that I learned from the sheep. The reason you chose me is you have to take in the whole experience of the person. Yes, this nation is stubborn, certainly. But where are they coming from? Yeah? Not 5 months ago, they were slaves. They had been slaves for 200 years. They're getting over trauma and abuse and oppression and repression and depression and compression. You expect them to behave nicely the first time you ask them? But after 40 years of being in the desert and absorbing the messages of Torah, this nation will be the kind of nation that will make you proud. Because they're stubborn. Because they have what it takes to stay true to you no matter what. And Hashem says to him, you're right. To be a Jew in this world, you have to be a fighter. You have to be a little rebellious. You have to be a little bit free-spirited. You have to be extremely stubborn. Everything in the world has changed. Jewish people have not changed. Our clothing has changed. Our dialect has changed. Our eating habits have changed. The essence of the Jew has not changed. We are devoted, committed, stubbornly to our precepts, to the teachings of Torah. We're not going anywhere. We are the nation of God's dreams. We stubbornly stick to it like nobody else could. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu took the lesson that he learned from Hashem, from that sheep, and he presents it to Hashem. He says, Hashem, I was listening. When you had that sheep run away from me, you had the little Shepsele run away from me and disappear into the wilderness so that I should meet you at the burning bush. I heard the lesson loud and clear. A little lamb does not run away for no reason. When the sheep in my flock, the Jewish people, are rebelling, it's not against me. They are in search of something. They are in need of something. We must never, ever write them off, never, ever give up hope, never, ever decide that they are not worth the time and effort it takes to listen to hear them, and to try to understand the whole person, the whole student, the whole Jew, the whole Shepselah. Listen, with such a positive outlook, certainly the Jewish people deserve that we should be blessed with the coming of Mashiach speedily, because when you look at how well we've done over the years, it's incredible. We're here, we're committed. Sometimes we're rebellious, yeah. Sometimes we're trying to strut our own individuality. But under it all, we are devoted and loving, and we're not going anywhere. And for that reason alone, we deserve that Hashem should send us Mashiach Tzidkenu and take us out of this galus. And if he needs one more thing from us, it would be that we should treat each other the way we are asking him to treat us. Accept the entire person that you're looking at for who they truly are, the whole picture, and really appreciate one another, and really be caring for one another, and really and truly love and reach out and embrace every Jew, whether you know him or you don't know him. Sometimes it's easier to embrace a Jew that you don't know than a Jew that you do know. We have to do it anyway, and we can do it. And that's the moral of the story. That's the message that we learn from the Lamb on the Lamb. Good Shabbos. Thanks for joining.